Imagery intelligence is an intelligence-gathering discipline which collects information via satellite and aerial photography. As a means of collecting intelligence, IMINT is a subset of intelligence collection management, which, in turn, is a subset of intelligence cycle management. IMINT is especially complemented by non-imaging MASINT electro-optical and radar senses. History. Origins. Although aerial photography was first used extensively in the First World War, it was only in the Second World War that specialized imagery intelligence operations were initiated. High-quality images were made possible with a series of innovations in the decade leading up to the war. In 1928, the RAF developed an electric heating system for the aerial camera. This allowed reconnaissance aircraft to take pictures from very high altitudes without the camera parts freezing. In 1939, Sidney Cotton and Flying Officer Maurice Longbottom of the RAF suggested that airborne reconnaissance may be a task better suited to fast, small aircraft which would use the speed and high service ceiling to avoid detection and interception. They proposed the use of Spitfires with their armament and radios removed and replaced with extra fuel and cameras. This led to the development of the Spitfire PR variants. These planes had a maximum speed of 396 miles per hour at 30,000 feet with their armaments removed, and were used for photo reconnaissance missions. The aircraft were fitted with 5 cameras which were heated to ensure good results. The systematic collection and interpretation of the huge amounts of aerial reconnaissance intelligence data soon became imperative. Beginning in 1941, RAF Medmenham was the main interpretation center for photographic reconnaissance operations in the European and Mediterranean theaters. The Central Interpretation Unit was later amalgamated with the Bomber Command Damage Assessment Section and the Night Photographic Interpretation Section of No. 3 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, RAF Oakington, in 1942. During 1942 and 1943, the CIU gradually expanded and was involved in the planning stages of practically every operation of the war, and in every aspect of intelligence. In 1945, daily intake of material averaged 25,000 negatives and 60,000 prints. 36 million prints were made during the war. By VE Day, the print library, which documented and stored worldwide cover, held 5 million prints from which 40,000 reports had been produced. American personnel had for some time formed an increasing part of the CIU, and on the 1st of May 1944 this was finally recognized by changing the title of the unit to the Allied Central Interpretation Unit. There were then over 1,700 personnel on the unit's strength. A large number of photographic interpreters were recruited from the Hollywood film studios, including Xavier Atencio. 2 renowned archaeologists also worked there as interpreters: Dorothy Garrett, the first woman to hold an Oxbridge chair, and Glyn Daniel, who went on to gain popular acclaim as the host of the television game show Animal, Vegetable and Mineral. Sidney Cotton's aerial photographs were far ahead of the time. Together with other members of his reconnaissance squadron, he pioneered the technique of high-altitude, high-speed photography that was instrumental in revealing the locations of many crucial military and intelligence targets. Cotton also worked on ideas such as a prototype specialist reconnaissance aircraft and further refinements of photographic equipment. At its peak, British reconnaissance flights yielded 50,000 images per day to interpret. Of particular significance in the success of the work of Medmenham was the use of stereoscopic images, using a between-plate overlap of exactly 60%. Despite initial skepticism about the possibility of the German rocket technology, major operations, including the 1943 offensives against the V-2 rocket development development plant at IMINT, were made possible by painstaking work carried out at Medmenham. Later offensives were also made against potential launch sites at Wizens and 96 other launch sites in northern France. It is claimed that Medmenham's greatest operational success was Operation Crossbow, which, from the 23rd of December 1943, destroyed the V1 infrastructure in northern France. According to R.V. Jones, photographs were used to establish the size and the characteristic launching mechanisms for both the V1 flying bomb and the V2 rocket. Post-war spy planes immediately after World War II. Long-range aerial reconnaissance was taken up by adapted jet bombers, such as the English Electric Canberra, and its American development, the Martin B-57, capable of flying higher or faster than the enemy. Highly specialized and secretive strategic reconnaissance aircraft, or spy planes, such as the Lockheed U-2 and its successor, the State Route 71 Blackbird, were developed by the United States. Flying these aircraft became an exceptionally demanding task, as much because of the aircraft's extreme speed and altitude as it was because of the risk of being captured as spies. As a result, the crews of these aircraft were invariably specially selected and trained. There are claims that the U.S. constructed a hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft, dubbed the Aurora, in the late 1980s to replace the Blackbird. Since the early 1960s, in the United States, aerial and satellite reconnaissance has been coordinated by the National Reconnaissance Office. Use of satellites. Early photographic reconnaissance satellites used photographic film, which was exposed on orbit and returned to Earth for developing. These satellites remained in orbit for days, weeks, or months before ejecting the film. Return vehicles, called buckets. Between 1959 and 1984, the U.S. launched around 200 such satellites under the codenames Corona and Gambit, with ultimate photographic resolution better than 4 inches. The first successful mission concluded on the 19th of August 1960 with the mid-air recovery by C-119 of film from the Corona mission, code-named Discoverer 14. This was the first successful recovery of film from an orbiting satellite and the first aerial recovery of an object returning from Earth orbit. Because of a trade-off between area covered and ground resolution, not all reconnaissance satellites have been designed for high resolution. The KH-5ARGON program had a ground resolution of 140 meters and was intended for map making. Between 1961 and 1994, the USSR launched perhaps 500 Zenit film return satellites, which returned both the film and the camera to Earth in a pressurized capsule. The U.S. KH-11 series of satellites, first launched in 1976, was made by Lockheed, the same contractor who built the Hubble Space Telescope. HST has a 2.4 meters telescope mirror and is believed to have had a similar appearance to the KH-11 satellites. These satellites used charge-coupled devices, predecessors to modern digital cameras, rather than film. Russian reconnaissance satellites with comparable capabilities are named Resursdk and Persona. Aircraft, low and high-flying planes have been used all through the last century to gather intelligence about the enemy. U.S. high-flying reconnaissance planes include the Lockheed U-2 and the much faster State Route 71 Blackbird. Planes have the advantage over satellites that they can usually produce more detailed photographs and can be placed over the target more quickly, more often, and more cheaply, but have the disadvantage of possibly being intercepted by aircraft or missiles, such as in the 1960 U-2 incident. Unmanned aerial vehicles have been developed for imagery and signals intelligence. These drones are a force multiplier by giving the battlefield commander an eye in the sky without risking a pilot.